It's October 1914. A British sergeant named William Davies is crouched in a shallow trench near Ypres, Belgium. He's wearing a soft cloth cap, the same cap British soldiers have worn for decades. It keeps the rain off, it looks sharp on parade, and it offers exactly zero protection against the German artillery shells exploding 50 yards away. A shell bursts overhead. Shrapnel, jagged chunks of hot metal traveling at 1,500 feet per second, rains down into the trench. Davies feels something slam into the top of his head. He's dead before he hits the mud. The shrapnel fragment that killed him weighs less than an ounce. This scene repeats itself thousands of times across the Western Front in the fall of 1914. British, French, and German soldiers are dying not from bullets, but from metal fragments falling from the sky. Artillery shells don't need to score direct hits. They explode above trenches and shower troops with steel. And every army in Europe has sent its men into this war wearing cloth caps, leather helmets, or nothing at all. The numbers are staggering. By December 1914, British medical officers are tracking a pattern they've never seen before. Head wounds account for up to 20% of all casualties. In previous wars, the Boer War, the Crimean War, head wounds were rare. Soldiers fought in the open, moving targets. Bullets hit torsos, limbs, wherever they struck. But trench warfare changes the math completely. In a trench, a soldier's body is protected by dirt. His head sticks up. It's the only target. And when artillery shells burst overhead, shrapnel falls straight down, directly onto skulls protected by nothing but wool and pride. French military doctors notice the same thing. So do the Germans. Everyone is losing men to the same problem. A 20-year-old soldier survives machine gun fire, survives a bayonet charge, survives weeks of mud and disease, then dies because a quarter-inch piece of steel drops onto his unprotected head from 40 feet up. The French move first. In early 1915, they start issuing steel skullcaps, small metal bowls that soldiers wear under their cloth caps. It's crude, it's uncomfortable, but it works. Head wound fatalities drop immediately. French commanders notice something else. Morale improves. Soldiers feel safer. They take fewer sick days. They hold positions longer. The British War Office receives reports about the French skullcaps by February 1915. Staff officers read them, file them, and do nothing. Steel helmets seem foreign, almost medieval. British soldiers wear caps. That's tradition. That's identity. A steel helmet looks ridiculous, like something from a costume drama. Meanwhile, the casualties keep mounting. By spring 1915, British hospitals are overwhelmed with head trauma cases. Surgeons extract shrapnel from skulls, patch bone fragments, and watch young men die from wounds that a quarter-inch of steel could have prevented. The British Army is about to learn a brutal lesson. Tradition doesn't stop shrapnel. Pride doesn't deflect artillery. And looking ridiculous is a lot better than being dead. Real quick before we dive deeper, drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. What city, what state, what country, and what time is it where you are right now? Always wild to see how far this stuff travels. All right, let's get back into it. By the summer of 1915, British field hospitals have become factories of horror. Surgeons work 18-hour shifts extracting metal from shattered skulls. The wounds follow a sickening pattern. Jagged entry points on the top or side of the head, bone fragments driven into brain tissue, survivors left blind, paralyzed, or unable to speak. Dr. Harvey Cushing, an American neurosurgeon volunteering with British forces, documents what he sees. In 1 month alone, he operates on 133 head wound cases. 46 of those men die on the operating table. Of the survivors, fewer than half will ever function normally again. Cushing writes in his journal that he's never seen anything like it. The shrapnel wounds aren't clean. The metal tumbles as it falls, tearing through tissue in unpredictable paths. The mathematics of trench warfare make the problem inescapable. A standard German 70mm field gun fires shells containing 300 steel balls, each one designed to scatter on detonation. A single battery of 4 guns can saturate a 100-yard section of trench with over 1,200 projectiles per minute. British soldiers crouch in those trenches, heads exposed, wearing caps made of wool. The British Expeditionary Force tracks casualty statistics with grim precision. In the first 4 months of 1915, head wounds account for between 15% and 20% of all combat injuries. But here's the number that matters. Head wounds account for nearly 50% of all fatalities. A soldier hit in the arm usually survives. A soldier hit in the leg usually survives. A soldier hit in the head usually dies. The French steel skullcap, the Cervelière, proves the concept works. French units equipped with the skullcaps see head wound fatalities drop by 30% almost immediately. But the Cervelière has problems. It's small, covering only the crown of the head. It offers no protection to the temples, forehead, or neck. Soldiers complain it shifts around, falls off, gives them headaches. It's a stopgap, not a solution. What's needed is a proper helmet, something that covers the entire skull, deflects shrapnel from multiple angles, and can be manufactured by the millions. The British War Office finally acknowledges this in June 1915, nearly a year after the trenches first formed. They issue a formal request: design a steel helmet for British troops. The specifications seem simple. The helmet must weigh less than 2 pounds. It must be made from steel thick enough to stop shrapnel, but thin enough for mass production. It must fit over existing caps. It must be cheap. The Army needs millions of them, and fast. But there's a problem nobody wants to discuss openly. British steel mills are already running at capacity, producing artillery shells, rifle barrels, and ship plates. Every pound of steel allocated to helmets is a pound not going to weapons. Some War Office officials argue that helmets are defensive, almost cowardly. Real soldiers don't hide behind steel, they attack. This attitude costs lives every single day it persists. While bureaucrats debate, surgeons amputate. While committees meet, mothers receive telegrams. The British Army is bleeding out through its collective skull, and the solution is sitting right there, waiting for someone to actually build it. That someone turns out to be a 55-year-old inventor from London who's never served a day in uniform. John Leopold Brodie is not a soldier. He's an engineer and inventor, born in London in 1860, trained in metallurgy and industrial design. He spent his career solving practical problems, designing ventilation systems, improving manufacturing processes, tinkering in his workshop. In the summer of 1915, he reads about the head wound crisis in the newspapers and decides to do something about it. Brodie's approach is radically different from the French skullcap. He doesn't start with what a helmet should look like. He starts with what a helmet needs to do. And what it needs to do, above all else, is stop shrapnel falling from above. He studies the geometry of trench warfare. Soldiers stand upright in trenches, heads exposed. Artillery bursts overhead. Shrapnel falls in a cone pattern, mostly vertical. The greatest threat isn't a bullet coming straight at you. It's metal dropping onto your skull and shoulders from 40 feet up. Brodie's solution is a wide, shallow dome with a pronounced rim extending all the way around. The shape looks almost like a soup bowl flipped upside down. Critics immediately mock it. It looks nothing like the spiked German Pickelhaube or the crested French Adrian helmet. It looks, frankly, ridiculous. But the physics are perfect. The wide brim deflects shrapnel falling at steep angles, protecting not just the skull, but the neck and shoulders. The shallow dome presents a curved surface that causes metal fragments to glance off rather than penetrate. The whole design is optimized for one specific threat: artillery. Brodie submits his prototype to the War Office in August 1915. Testing begins immediately at the Woolwich Arsenal. Engineers fire shrapnel at the helmet from various angles. They drop steel balls onto it from measured heights. They compare penetration rates against French and captured German helmets. The results silence every critic. The Brodie helmet stops shrapnel that punches straight through the French Adrian. Its curved surface deflects fragments that would lodge in a flat-topped design. And the wide brim, the feature that looks most ridiculous, proves most effective. Shrapnel that would strike a soldier's temple or neck glances harmlessly off the rim. The War Office approves the design on September 15, 1915. Production contracts go out immediately. But manufacturing millions of helmets from hardened steel presents its own challenges. Standard steel isn't strong enough. Shrapnel punches through it. The solution is a special manganese steel alloy called Hadfield steel, 12% manganese by weight, capable of being hardened to resist penetration while remaining slightly flexible to absorb impact. The first batch of 500,000 Brodie helmets ships to France in November 1915. Distribution begins with frontline troops, the men under constant artillery fire. Soldiers receive the helmets with mixed reactions. Some complain about the weight, others mock the appearance. A few refuse to wear them, claiming they'll mark the wearer as a coward. Then the shells start falling, and suddenly nobody's laughing anymore. Private Thomas Wilson, 2nd Battalion Royal Fusiliers, takes a direct shrapnel hit to the head during a German barrage near Loos in December 1915. The fragment strikes his new helmet, dents the steel, and ricochets away. Wilson staggers, his ears ringing, but walks to the aid station under his own power. 3 months earlier, he'd have been dead. The steel bowl that looked so ridiculous just saved its first life. It won't be the last. July 1st, 1916, the Somme. The biggest British offensive of the war begins with a 7-day artillery bombardment, 1.5 million shells fired at German positions. Then the whistles blow. Over 100,000 British soldiers climb out of their trenches and advance toward the German lines. The Germans survive the bombardment. Their deep bunkers, some 30 feet underground, protect them from everything the British artillery throws. When the shelling stops, German machine gunners race to the surface, set up their MG-08 Maxims, and open fire. The slaughter is immediate and catastrophic. 240 British soldiers die on the first day alone. Another 35,000 are wounded. It's the worst single day in British military history. But buried in the casualty statistics is a number that changes everything. Head wound fatalities among troops wearing Brodie helmets dropped by 75% compared to the same period in 1915. 75%. 3 out of 4 men who would have died from shrapnel to the skull survive because of a steel bowl designed by a London inventor. Medical officers document case after case. Soldiers struck by fragments that would have killed them outright a year earlier walk into aid stations with dented helmets, headaches, and their lives intact. Surgeon General Sir Alfred Keogh orders a formal study. His teams examine 2,500 head wound cases from the Somme offensive. Among soldiers wearing helmets, the ratio of fatal to non-fatal head injuries reverses completely. Before the Brodie, head wounds killed more often than not. After the Brodie, most head wound victims survive. The numbers convince even the most skeptical officers. By August 1916, the War Office orders production scaled to maximum capacity. Factories across Britain stamp out Brodie helmets around the clock. Steel mills prioritize the manganese alloy. The target, 1 helmet for every soldier in the British Army, plus reserves. Production hits 1.5 million helmets by the end of 1916. By mid-1917, the number reaches 3 million. Every British soldier on the Western Front wears one. So do troops in Mesopotamia, Palestine, and East Africa. The helmet becomes as standard as the rifle. German intelligence notices the change. captured documents show German officers puzzling over the British helmet's effectiveness. Their own Stahlhelm, introduced in early 1916, uses a different design philosophy: deeper sides, a pronounced neck guard, a more aggressive appearance. It works well against horizontal fire, but offers less protection from above. German troops start calling the Brodie the Schusselhelm, the bowl helmet. They mean it as an insult. It doesn't matter. The bowl keeps working. At Passchendaele in 1917, British soldiers fight through mud so deep it swallows men whole. Artillery barrages turn the battlefield into a moonscape of craters and corpses. Shrapnel falls like rain for weeks at a time. And the Brodie helmet, battered and dented, keeps stopping fragments that would have been fatal 18 months earlier. Private Frederick Collins, 1st Battalion Hertfordshire Regiment, survives 3 separate shrapnel strikes to his helmet during the Passchendaele campaign. Each impact leaves a visible dent. Collins keeps the helmet after the war, shows it to his grandchildren, points to the dents and says, "That's 3 times I should have died." He isn't exaggerating. By November 1918, when the guns finally fall silent, British factories have produced over 7.5 million Brodie helmets. The design has spread far beyond the British Expeditionary Force. American troops arriving in France in 1917 received their own version, the M1917, virtually identical to the British original. Portuguese, Belgian, and Italian forces adopt variations. The simple steel bowl becomes the defining image of Allied soldiers on the Western Front. The statistics tell the story more clearly than any memoir. British Army medical records show that head wound fatalities drop from nearly 50% of all combat deaths in 1914 to under 20% by 1918. The absolute number of head wounds doesn't decline. Artillery actually intensifies as the war progresses. What changes is survival. Men who would have died now live. Men who would have suffered catastrophic brain injuries walk away with concussions. Dr. Harvey Cushing, the American neurosurgeon who documented the horror of head wounds in 1915, notices the transformation. By 1918, his operating theater sees fewer skull fractures, fewer penetrating brain injuries, fewer hopeless cases. The wounds he treats are still serious, shrapnel still kills, but the helmet buys time, buys millimeters, buys the margin between death and survival. John Leopold Brodie receives a knighthood in 1918 for his contribution to the war effort. He never serves in uniform, never fires a weapon, never sets foot in a trench. But his invention saves more British lives than most generals can claim. He dies in 1936, largely forgotten by the public, but remembered by every veteran who ever felt shrapnel slam into steel instead of skull. The Brodie helmet remains in British service for decades. Troops wear it in World War II, in North Africa, in Normandy, in the jungles of Burma. The design finally retires in the 1980s, replaced by more modern composites and synthetic materials. But the basic principle Brodie established, that a helmet should be designed around the specific threats soldiers actually face, becomes the foundation of every military helmet that follows. American forces eventually develop the M1 helmet, a deeper design that improves on the Brodie's coverage. The M1 serves from 1942 through Vietnam. Modern helmets like the Advanced Combat Helmet use Kevlar and ballistic polymers that Brodie couldn't have imagined. But they all descend from that first steel bowl, stamped out in British factories while artillery shook the Western Front. The lesson of the Brodie helmet isn't just about metallurgy or industrial production. It's about the cost of tradition, the price of pride, and the men who pay when leaders value appearance over survival. For nearly a year, British soldiers died from wounds a simple steel hat could have prevented, because staff officers thought helmets looked ridiculous, seemed cowardly, violated tradition. It took a civilian inventor, working from newspaper reports and basic physics, to solve a problem the military refused to acknowledge. Brodie didn't ask what a helmet should look like. He asked what a helmet needed to do. And that single question, answered honestly, saved hundreds of thousands of lives. The next time you see a construction worker in a hard hat, a cyclist in a bike helmet, a football player in protective headgear, remember where it started. A 55-year-old London engineer, a shallow steel dome, and the radical idea that looking ridiculous beats being dead.